Hello and welcome to a special election edition of Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm L. Joy Williams, a national political strategist, and my co-hosts with me today are Ben Max, executive editor at Gotham Gazette, and Jeff Mays, political reporter with DNA Info New York. The presidential election this November is officially Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. The conventions are over and the battle for the White House continues. What can we expect from now until the first debate? So thank you for joining me, Ben and Jeff, and we're just gonna have a conversation here about this very atypical election season. So first, let's talk about the conventions. We've had some time to process them, to look post both of the conventions of each party. What would you say is the main takeaway from our inside baseball and then also from the public watching? Let's start with you, Ben.
Well, I think you saw a really big difference between the two conventions. You had the Republican convention was so much about Donald Trump and so much about sort of fear and depicting an America in disarray. And then you had the Democratic convention, which was this sort of all-star cast of Democrats, and it was about Hillary Clinton, but it was very much about the Obamas and, you know, many others, Bernie Sanders, obviously. So you saw that difference, and also the fact that the Democrats tried to capture the sort of hopeful, more, you know, America is in a great place now and going even further, not in a horrible place that we need to make great again.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think Democrats really wanted to differentiate themselves from Republicans. So what you saw was a sense that, okay, there's only one choice here, and it's us. And it's because Donald Trump is dangerous, he's irresponsible. You know, Bloomberg questioned his sanity. So, you know, speaker after speaker at that convention just really tried to hammer home the point that Donald Trump is not fit to be president. And consequently, they tried to show that Hillary Clinton is. So again, as Ben said, you had the big names out there. You had Bill Clinton and President Obama and Michelle Obama. Whereas, you know, at the Republican convention, you know, they kind of had Scott Baio.
You know, what's interesting, that contrast that both of the conventions show, you know, we know that the conventions are political theater, right? We're putting on a show for the American people and asking them to choose a side. What I found interesting is that the Democrats sort of adopted a lot of the language and theater that normally you would associate with Republicans. That happened in showing the Big Tent, right? So the Big Tent, there were different people who had different views, whether you were for Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. So there was varying positions that way.
The Democrats, I mean, you said it exactly. The size of the tent that they're trying to build right now, and this, I wonder for them if this is actually a little bit dangerous to try to go too big with the tent.
Okay.
Because they're going, that convention had everybody from the furthest sort of lefty Bernie Sanders type all the way to moderate Republicans, right? You had the Bloomberg independent, you know, Michael Bloomberg independent, moderate Republican, moderate Democrat, but they even had a couple of Republican activists speak who said, can't do Trump, so I'm here.
Yeah.
And that is a big tent.
Right, yeah, and I think because the Republicans have focused so much on Trump, and because Trump doesn't necessarily follow a lot of these traditional Republican values, that Democrats have seen an opportunity here to victory. So they are going to have to open it up to some of these other groups in order to win. It makes sense for them to be reaching out for moderate Republicans because for Trump, they're the mainstays of the Republican Party, the Bushes, the Mitt Romneys. They've all denounced him in various ways. And even this weekend, this controversy with Mr. Khan and Mr. Trump disrespecting Mr. Khan's wife, you see that even his own party is denouncing him. So the Democrats, it makes sense for them to try to go after those individuals.
But isn't that the point? What do each of these candidates need to do now that the primaries are over, the conventions are over, they're the official nominees? Don't they need to branch out and sort of looking towards the general election and garner more than their base and supporters in order to get elected?
I mean, I think you saw even during the convention the Democrats doing that, right? Like we just said with the Big Ten, and Hillary Clinton's on the campaign trail yesterday with Warren Buffett, and you know, I mean, she's got, again, she's towing a very interesting line by embracing the sort of billionaires who are coming out behind her with Buffett, Mark Cuban, and Michael Bloomberg, and that could, you know, have some ramifications in terms of bringing those Bernie Sanders supporters in. But the question is, are the Republicans going to do that? Or is Donald Trump going to broaden his appeal and his base?
Do the numbers support that? Can Donald Trump win with just, the messaging that he's winning in those particular voters? I don't think the numbers support that. And so, but I am interested in your thought process here in towing the line that Clinton has to do. So is the Bernie Sanders effect or that portion of the Democratic population, is that still an issue? Have we completely, created a...
Well, what do you think? What do you think? You're not just going to ask the questions here?
Well, I think you're right. I think that it's a delicate balance, that she's walking a tightrope from now until Election Day. There are the people that are just going to be against Hillary Clinton no matter what. And they'll look for alternate ways or not participate, at least in the presidential portion of the ballot. And then there are people that can be persuaded. They can be persuaded by the messaging that was used, I'm not Trump, and watch out, there's danger there. And particularly the message, I think there's a difference in the way they're doing. While Trump is doing this, you should be afraid, they're taking your country away from you. There's a different kind of way that Democrats are spinning fear, where it's towards an individual and not that the country itself is spiraling out of control. Is that this individual will, further, take us down a rabbit hole that we can't get out.
Well, I think you saw Hillary Clinton during the convention. She picked up on some of Bernie Sanders' points. She talked about free college, community college education. She had the Mothers of the Movement up there to deal with Black Lives Matters issues. But even with that, even with these purposeful efforts to reach out to Bernie Sanders supporters, you still saw the protests in the crowd outside of the convention center that had to be drowned out by Hillary chants. So, I think in these next few months, they are really going to have to work at making those Bernie voters say, look, it's better for me to vote for Hillary Clinton than to either vote for an independent or to just stay on the sidelines this time. That's a real critical contingent.
So what do the candidates do now post-convention? We have, vacation is, ending. Right. People are going to tune out a little bit because the theater of the conventions are over. September, after Labor Day, people will kick back in. They'll have their own local primaries. But then come October, beginning of October, is when we'll really start to see another rev up from the campaigns. What do they need to do in between that time?
Well, I think it's interesting. You just hit on something really important for those of us who are so into this all the time, and maybe even some people watching who follow this closely, is that a large portion of Americans will not be paying much attention until, maybe September 26th is the first debate, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be, if Trump shows up, that's going to be must-see television, and some people are saying maybe the most watched event in American history, and it could be. So maybe around September 26th, a lot of people will start to pay more attention. Between now and then, there's going to be people on vacation, there's people reading a news article here and there's people watching a little CNN. So I think what you see coming out of the conventions, and this has already started, is it's about voter contact, right? It's actually about being in swing states and holding rallies and being out on the trail and going to fairs and doing all that stuff that is still the retail politics of elections, but it happens to be the big one.
Yeah.
You'd hope you see Hillary Clinton expound a little bit more on policy, because they've already made the case that we're a different candidate from Trump. We're not Trump. We're competent. But now I think she needs to look to separate herself policy-wise from him, to show, look, these are the plans I've outlined. Trump has outlined less clear plans and kind of just doesn't expound on them, just says things are going to work out great. So here's my specific, explicit steps on how I'm going to make things better for this country.
Do you think, I actually agree with you. I think that the difference she can show is just by going in detail to the American people and saying, here's a plan, this is how we pay for it, this is what effects it'll have on your pocketbook, this is what it will have for your family, for the urban city, for wherever you live, because the other side just has talking points.
Well, she's certainly going to give policy speeches and have policy events, and she'll drive some news. That's the other thing. You do the retail politics, especially in the swing states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, and others, but you also figure out ways to plant, to get news around your candidacy, especially in August, right? And she'll do that. She'll release policy and she'll hold policy. but the big question is, will he? Will Donald Trump do anything different than he's been doing?
Well, that brings me to a question, as we said, leading up to, I certainly believe that there are going to be lots of books written about this election cycle, and particularly about media's role in this election cycle. And this election has been very different. There are some things that the candidates have done that would have not ever, they would have been disqualifying in different elections. And so what do you think that Clinton, for that matter, are you guys going to get, from a media perspective, as the two reporters in the room, are you going to get answers to the questions that you're still asking, with lots of things being released via Twitter instead of press releases and press conferences, or press conferences that just ramble on, just thinking off the top of your head? What is the status of media in this election cycle going forward? I
mean, it's so important for Donald Trump. I mean, you can argue that he used the media to get to the point where he is now, and they haven't done a lot of ad buys and that sort of thing. I mean, my own personal critique on the media is that I think we kind of took Donald Trump a little too lightly. There was a sense that there was an entertainment value there. Oh, he'll never be the nomination. Let's have a little fun with this. And I think that kind of hurt the initial discussion and discourse about him, where there should have been, what you're seeing now is a lot of good articles delving into his business practices, delving into his draft history. The New York Times had an excellent article today about his draft deferment. So I think some of this stuff probably should have come maybe a little earlier when it was looking like he was shaping up to be one of the serious candidates, but now it's coming a little later, and I'm not sure it makes much of a difference, because people who support Trump are going to support him regardless, irregardless of what's printed.
I think Jeff's absolutely right, but I think some of the question around where were some of these more damning stories goes back to, as you know, his opponents. I mean, where were the primary opponents and their opposition research and their efforts to really, take him down, as well as the Republican National Committee, who did not want him as the candidate. Now, they've rallied around him, and Reince Priebus knows that his job is probably very much up in the air. But that's one of the big questions around that I wouldn't put it fully on the media, but although I do think he was very much treated lightly, what we've seen now, not only in writing but also in TV interviews, I mean, the media has ratcheted up a notch in terms of pushing him for answers, calling him out on some of his either contradictions or non-answers, and we're seeing that tougher approach, and I think it's having an effect. With Hillary Clinton, who clearly doesn't like to talk to the press, that's another issue again, is pushing that campaign and pushing that candidate to answer questions.
I get the sense that, just being around for a long time, I like Clinton better in small settings. She does better in small settings. All of the negatives that people sort of report, that she, seems disconnected, or that in a small setting, you get the sense that she cares, she knows her stuff, she seems more presidential. And the rallies, the big sort of things, are not best for her. Whereas the contrast for Trump is that he does well in the big rallies, in gathering people and whipping up spirit and support. What do you say about the differences in that aspect?
Well, I think what you hit on is also true for Hillary Clinton with the media. That in a one-on-one interview, she's pretty good, but she doesn't want to stand or sit, or whatever the mode is. She doesn't want to be at a press conference taking 50 questions from 25 different reporters. That is not her venue. So that seems to go to personality type. She's, I think, refreshingly been very forward about how she's not a great public politician. She wants to govern. She wants to do policy. Well, that's not a way elections work, obviously, so you have to overcome some of that. But it was actually refreshing to hear her say, I'm not the politician that my husband is or that President Obama is. And she hit that note again at the convention.
Right. And I mean, I think for the media as well, like, there needs to be some examination as Hillary rolls out policy, an examination of that policy, whether it's legitimate, whether it's feasible, can it work, do the numbers make sense? And also there needs to be some questions. If Trump is not rolling out policy, there need to be questions about, well, what are your plans? You need to reveal some plans. As you said, Trump can stand there at a press conference for an hour, answer questions, but there's no talk of his plans. You know, I mean, to me, that's amazing in this day and age that he can have a 40-minute press conference and there is very little talk about policy or his plans.
At one point, will media walk out? Will they not attend? Or is the ratings just that good that or the story just that good?
It's beyond that. I think it's too late to walk out.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, I think that would also, I think that would be sort of a dereliction of duty. I mean, I think what you need to do is you need to stick with it and you need to push and you need to push hard and then you need to write whatever the case is, whatever the facts are. You can write a story when someone holds a press conference and doesn't really answer any of the questions that, you know, candidate X evades 25 questions in a 40-minute press conference. You can write that and make that person look like they don't have answers, or present that they didn't have answers. You know, I think with the media role, one of the biggest things is there's so much volume of sort of just, well, this event happened and Trump said all this stuff. And what we're seeing is some real pushback coming out of the primary, I think, too, of the members of the media and outlets and specific reporters and editors have choices to make about how frankly are they presenting to their readers and their audiences about the things that the Trump candidacy and the Trump candidate are putting out there, and things that are seen as a danger to, for example, the U.S. Constitution, right? And people have a choice, and this is very murky territory because we're just not familiar with someone who is this type of candidate saying these types of things.
Yeah.
And I think one of the good things I'm happy to see from media is, for example, the annotation of speeches and press conferences. I think that's been a very powerful tool because you can just annotate it, say, you know what, this is just not true and this is why.
Yeah.
And I see more and more media outlets starting to do that with both Hillary and Donald Trump speeches.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the other decisions that the candidates and the campaigns have made thus far in terms of who they've pulled around them as part of their team, right? So both of them made a choice in who their vice president pick is going to be. And there certainly, you know, is some commentary on both sides about whether their VP pick helps or hurts them. So let's start with Trump and his pick for vice president.
I think Indiana Governor Mike Pence was an uncharacteristically safe choice for Donald Trump. There also weren't a lot of people looking to join the ticket, so he had some challenges there. And you have this guy who's this bombastic reality TV star who probably didn't want someone else who was going to step on some of that. So he picked a very solid, straight-laced, very conservative Midwestern guy. What's fascinating to me is how much they disagree on. I don't know if, you know, viewers of this program or you guys watched the first joint interview they did with 60 Minutes was remarkable because Leslie Stahl sat there and said, well, you say this and you say this and you believe this, but you believe this. And Mike Pence just had to sort of swallow and say, well, this is the presidential candidate, so we're sort of going with him.
Yeah, I think Trump's choice really was an effort just to kind of get that conservative base and solidify that he's going to need if he's going to win this election. So, I mean, the wild quotes only get you so far. So I think that choice of Mike Pence kind of makes a sense with some of those voters.
I find it fascinating throughout this whole process, and we talked about this before, that the Republican establishment obviously did not want Trump to be the nominee and now have abandoned their, own morals and put things aside, and it's like, we would rather win, than, keep our traditions and keep, focus and save face. It's very interesting. It's the focus of we need to win, not necessarily be right or be moral.
Yeah, it's sort of fascinating. You're watching, including Governor Pence, but also House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, sort of twisting themselves all around to continue to support Trump, but to put out these statements saying, well, he didn't exactly mean to say this, or they don't even mention Trump in the statements, but they're sort of walking back some of the things he said as not being emblematic of the Republican Party. It's, it's something of a mess in that direction, and it's something where, at this point, I don't think anybody has faith that Trump himself is going to have more discipline, which is the key here for him. So I don't know where that leaves them.
Well, let's talk about Clinton's pick. There are certainly some differences in opinion, and particularly on policy And going back to our earlier comment about the progressive wing or the liberal wing of the Democratic Party having disagreements with the VP pick on that side as well.
Well, I think he's a safe pick again, another safe pick, a guy who's never lost an election. I mean, you could tell from his speech at the convention, very straight-laced, very, very safe.
Folksy.
Yeah, folksy, and, a relatable guy, more relatable than, say, Hillary Clinton. So I think she needed that sort of person to balance out her ticket so far. I mean, I think the big question is going to be, how's he going to perform in the debates? Is that going to come across? Is he going to be able to make up for that personality gap that Hillary Clinton has? I think that's a big question.
For me, what's interesting, and so, I was in the room when he did his speech, and I was so disinterested. For me, I am more, I guess because it's the overachieving, woman in me, that I more identify with Hillary Clinton than the folksy type. It's just like, I just want to get the work done. I don't necessarily have to be this public persona. And so I was not as, taken in the folksy, speech. It was sort of, like you said, a safe pick, and it's just like, okay, I guess that's the guy, but it wasn't something that sort of excites. And for me, I think going into the November election, what the Clinton campaign has to deal with is this huge enthusiasm gap that they're going to have to close in order to not only get the base out, but in order to get people out enough to, vote her in. And I don't think that the VP pick necessarily helps with that.
Right. I mean, you hit on a great point that it's essential that we mention, which is about turnout, right? And who's going to turn out, and how you get, your voters to turn out in November, and if people are motivated as much by enthusiasm for Clinton as they are fear of Trump, and vice versa on the other side. I mean, these are the big questions, and I think the Democrats and the Republicans have to figure out their messaging in order to capture who is motivated by what, as you know, is always key to figuring out how to maximize, who comes out to vote. Right. I think to your point about Tim Kaine as well, swing state, Virginia, try to lock that up. So much of this comes back to the electoral map, right? We can't get too caught up in the conventions or the national polls. So much of it is about maybe 7 or 8 states.
Yeah. I try to tell people all the time when they think this national election and everybody votes. I tell people, you have a representative vote. It's ultimately, down to the individual state so that we can make the electoral college number. So there's a trust issue on both sides of the campaign. There, like I said in the beginning, there are people on the Clinton side that it's either you're for Hillary or you're against her. Those are firm camps. And there's a small portion of people that need to be persuaded in order to get her to the win in November. And then certainly that we've seen Trump lie time over and over again. So there's a trust issue on both sides. How do each of them need to overcome that? Because, I personally think that it's an unfair it's unfair on the Clinton side of the trust issue, as someone who's been in public life for so long. Whereas I don't know if Trump actually believes the lies that he tells, or he just doesn't remember. I don't know.
I mean, I think during the convention there was this real effort to kind of humanize Hillary Clinton. First from Bill Clinton telling the story of how they met. And then you had Chelsea Clinton talking about her mother, what a great mother and grandmother she was. So I think that is a real effort to overcome that sort of trust issue. And then Clinton herself has been very frank about, hey, I made a mistake with these emails. However, I have this country's best interests at heart. Here's my history. I've been fighting for children, for families for a long time. So I think, they are pounding on that trust issue. There are just certain people who are just never going to trust her, and I think she realizes that. But I think for people who maybe don't like Trump but don't know if they should vote for her, that's the crowd that they are definitely hitting on. As far as Trump goes, I don't think he really cares about that issue, because that's not why people are voting for him. He already feels that people trust him, that he's their voice, so to speak, as he said. So I think the trust issue is more on Clinton to try to resolve with her voters.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't think I necessarily agree with you that Clinton's unfairly portrayed as being untrustworthy. I think there's a lot of issues there. I think she has, for good reason, some severe distrust of her opponents, and for some good reason, distrust of the media, and she plays that. But you also just see that she very often hedges. You just don't get a sense from her that she wants to be fully upright and out there with the public, that she's so guarded in a way that you just don't know what you're getting from her.
But is that the effect of being in public life so long and being attacked for so long?
It might be, or I'm sure it's at least partially so. But the fact that she even set up her private server, what's that all about? I understand that other Colin Powell and others have done things like that, but it just confirms people's skepticism of her in a valid way, I think. There are other things that are not as valid, but there are things that are there.
I mean, I don't completely understand it. I mean, Trump is the first candidate in 40 years to not release his tax returns? I mean, to me, that's a huge trust issue. Why don't you want to reveal your tax returns, talk about your tax rate and how you've been conducting your business? He's talked about his experience as a businessman as one of the main reasons why he should be elected president. So there's a lot of trust issues on both sides, I think. I think Trump doesn't really care because the fact that he can get away with not releasing his tax returns in this modern political age is pretty amazing to me.
Well, we have to wrap up here, but I'm going to ask one question that if you were in a room, one-on-one interview with either of the candidates, what question would you ask?
Oh, well, I mean, I think one of the big questions for Trump is what are your top priorities first 100 days, let's say? And another one that he's been asked and does not give a very good answer to is, do you actually want to be president?
Okay.
Yeah, that's the question I was going to ask. Do you really want this job? Do you really think you're capable of doing this job? It's not like running your own business where you can kind of do what you want. You've got Congress, you've got to fight. People aren't going to roll over once you're president. The sort of bombastics are not necessarily going to work. So,
great.
You? Question for Hillary?
The one question I would ask Hillary Clinton is to detail her plan for infrastructure in this country. And then particularly, question I'm still outstanding, I tweet at them all the time about it, is what are her MWBE goals for each of, I want a goal for each of the federal agencies, and then how she plans to make sure they achieve them.
That's a good one.
That's all the time we have. I'm L. Joy Williams, and on behalf of co-hosts Jeff Mays and Ben Max, thank you for watching this special election edition of Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Goodbye.